I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now is Eli Clifton. He is a investigative. Matt, help me.
Eli Clifton.
That's
He is
unbelievable.
a investigative reporter. He's a fellow reporting fellow. I
Reporting
forgot now.
fellow. This is a total disaster. Eli Clifton's a guy met in front of Penn Station. He has some interesting ideas.
No, he's a reporting fellow at the Investigative Fund for the Nation Institute.
Is that correct?
Ding, 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 ding.
Okay. All right. I don't know what it is. Yes, and where he does very good work, which we'll be talking about more confidently than I introduced him. Eli, how are you?
I'm actually the crazy homeless guy who screams at you every day.
Yeah.
Doing well, yourself?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I saw Eli on 33rd and 6th, and he was just saying, I want to be on the show. And I said, okay, all right.
Why'd you use your Bob Beckel impression for that?
That's how Bob Beckel got his job at Fox. Okay. They said, we would love for you to represent the Democratic point of view, Bob. That sounds great. Okay. All right. So before this completely goes off the rails, let's get to, you have a couple of recent pieces out that are both very important and actually speak to probably the defining domestic issue that we're dealing with right now and an essential foreign policy issue as well. And they both deal with the funding process of politics, which is a significant part of how politics actually gets done. So we're going to start first with this piece that appeared in Salon. It's called "The Exclusive Shady Double Agents Obamacare Sabotage. Top Supporter Quietly Funded Its Opposition." Now, I think a lot of people in this audience are familiar with the Obama administration's decision to try to appease the pharma industry in a run-up to passing Obamacare. And obviously, there's a lot of debate about that. I don't think there's much substantive debate. The policy implications were not good. But at any rate, but there's an established narrative that pharma kind of laid down its arms. And your report shows that it actually didn't. It played a double game. So explain that double game and who this shady double agent is.
Well, I think, as you just said, a big part of the narrative around the passage of the Affordable Care Act was that pivotal point, I believe it was in 2010, when the White House, as well as members of mainly the Democratic Party on the Hill, negotiated with the pharmaceutical lobby, which is known as Pharma, PHRMA, which is their lobbying arm in Washington, about specifically drug prices. That was the thing that really stuck for the pharmaceutical industry. Understandably, that is their product, and they were concerned that the Affordable Care Act would gut their profits, and according to them, the result would be an inability to invest in research and development of new drugs. Now, the way that panned out is that pharma ended up getting drug pricing concessions, where essentially they were guaranteed profits going forward for at least, I believe, 10 years of a certain amount, which is sort of unheard of in a free market system, to be promised a certain degree of profit. And in exchange, they publicly went on the record of saying that they supported the Affordable Care Act. They applauded it when it was passed. And it looked as if there had been compromises made on both sides. Both sides certainly claimed that they had been taken advantage of. Folks on the right said that the pharmaceutical industry had sold out. And folks on the left said that the White House had sold out, as well as congressional leadership, by being willing to go to the table with the pharmaceutical industry on these issues and sell out on drug pricing concessions. Now, I think what I've tried to show in this article is that the truth is that while they were negotiating this, pharma was also investing in state-level legislation that would block aspects of implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And they did so pretty much exactly in the time period in which they were starting to publicly be identified as negotiating with the White House.
Yeah, so who specifically was this leading pharma lobbyist who you have basically, you also spoke with him for the article, and you
Hmm.
have him actually publicly bragging about pharma's support for the passage of the Affordable Care Act after it passed, as well as his being a prime player in funding these state initiatives through ALEC, which is another name that is important here, which is obviously very familiar to a lot of our audience as well.
Well, I mean, the key player here is a guy named Billy Tauzin. He's a former congressman from Louisiana, and he went on to become the head of Pharma. And the thing about Tauzin and talking with him on the phone, as well as his reputation in Washington, and just you can even see it in the article here in terms of his own statements, is that he's extremely smooth. This guy was one of the top paid lobbyists in Washington when he retired. Pharma handed him $11.6 million, and based off of every conversation, the one conversation I've had with him, as well as his reputation, he deserved every penny of it. This guy is like a top tier lobbyist. You can throw anything at him, any type of hardball question, and nothing phases him.
Right.
I mean, in the conversations I had with him, I assumed that he would get heated or something about the suggestion I was making that he had engaged in sort of a two-faced negotiating strategy with the White House, and it was exactly the opposite. I mean, he embraced the fact that he had certainly been involved with supporting ALEC and supporting their agenda. That's the American Legislative Exchange Council, which promotes a vast variety of state-level legislation, generally anti-regulatory. And low taxes, of course, go with that. And between 2008 and 2011, Pharma handed them $1.25 million. And Tauzin's take on it is, yeah, sure, we gave them money. We support a free market. We support conservative economic policy, and that's that all falls in line with our industry as well as ALEC. So Tauzin embraces it.
Right. I mean, he's the type of guy that I'm the only reason if you watch True Detective, people will know this analogy, but there's this kind of, in True Detective, one of the plot segments is the possibility of very powerful politicians being involved in just these, absolutely horrific and hideous crimes. And Tauzin is the type of guy that if you asked him and said, hey, are you, in any way involved in a, potentially like, a sex trafficking ring, he'd be like, oh, well, maybe I was. And we made sure all those girls got educations or something. Like he nothing would faze him. I mean, the kind of brazenness level is just astonishing. And I mean, but I guess to get specifically with what were the specific pieces of state legislation that ALEC was backing? Also, just to be clear, I think you said that Pharma undertook that contribution, the money they gave ALEC was second only, I think, to was it Philip Morris, someone in the tobacco industry?
Reynolds.
Of Reynolds. Okay.
Yeah, it was second to Reynolds, which is kind of interesting that ALEC seems to be largely supported by the cigarette industry and the pharmaceutical industry, which, although people may have negative views about both of those industries, one would, at least in my mind, rarely think of them as working in concert.
Right.
But in this case, they appear to, or at least ALEC was able to embrace policies that appeased both of those divergent interest groups. But so ALEC started something called their Healthcare Freedom Initiative. And the Healthcare Freedom Initiative provided a guide to state legislatures about how they could limit their states' participation in Obamacare, in the Affordable Care Act. Now, a number of aspects of this are now moot because of the Supreme Court decision, but there still are individual pieces here and there that this legislation it continues to pass. A version of it just passed the Georgia State Senate and is now been sent to the governor to sign, that continue to get traction. And these laws tend to be called the Healthcare Freedom Act or the Freedom in Healthcare Acts. There's over 17 of them now have passed state legislatures around the country, and I think we'll continue to see them popping up. ALEC clearly has this as a priority. Now, Tauzin claims, when I put this to him, that, well, it seems like there's kind of double dealing going on here. Of course, he has a great out. So, well, ALEC took a specific positions on its own. The reason we allied was around that great central theme of protecting free market health care. The reason we supported ALEC, and I'd support them today for that reason, is that they represent a conservative economic view. So Tauzin is very good at being able to back away from the challenge of addressing individual aspects of ALEC's behavior and agenda when it's a political necessity for him to back away.
Yeah, so the other important question that this raises is, and this does go to the kind of larger question, obviously, of the decisions Obama administration pursued in getting this deal, and I think as the ACA kind of turns into reality, we see which I think people like, I'm assuming you and certainly me, I think are being relatively vindicated on the whole, and kind of that this was a real improvement over the status quo, which was a really dysfunctional and unacceptable status quo. And it's probably as about, of all of the options on the table, this was maybe the most realistically doable, but it was also the kind of smallest substantive improvement possible. And I think that, because obviously there have been problems in implementation, and there is a clunkiness in this law. But you definitely seem to report, and there's no reason to doubt that the Obama administration, pursued their negotiations with pharma in good faith, and were kind of blindsided by this. And I guess, what does that kind of tell us about their approach to this deal? Because it seems like on one hand there's this real, well, we have to be so pragmatic and so kind of politically attentive that we'll cut this deal with pharma, which is, as you say, guaranteeing future profits. I mean, this is not defensible policy. This is just pure deal making, and maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. But on the other hand, with that pragmatism, didn't prepare them for all of this money flowing to ALEC, which incidentally you would think might not be something, if it goes on from 2008 through 2011, that the administration would be entirely unaware of.
Right. I mean, and I think that the point you make at the end about it's a little hard to believe that they were completely unaware of it is probably spot on. I don't. There certainly is a possibility that they have been completely blindsided by this and never saw that the pharmaceutical industry might be hedging their bets in negotiating with the White House. I think the truth of the matter is the White House probably, whether they knew explicitly about these activities or not, understood that pharma was playing a very careful game, and one in which they were certainly not willing to throw wholehearted support behind the Affordable Care Act, and they were looking to create every loophole they could in it before its passage. Pharma, for their part, probably read the tea leaves and saw that this legislation was popular and was going to pass, and as a result, sought to get whatever concessions they could from the White House in the process. So, I mean, I don't think any of the actors here were totally naive. I think some of the folks in Congress, some of the negotiators in various congressional offices may have been a little more naive about what was going on. I've actually spoken to some of them, and they claim to have never heard of any of these activities on ALEC's part. But I think the reality is that, at least my hunch is that everybody involved went into it eyes open. Everybody was trying to get the best deal they could. The White House definitely wanted to get pharma on board. At the very least, they didn't want to have pharma as an enemy when they were actually trying to pass the legislation. And to that, in that sense, they were successful in bringing pharma on board, at least temporarily, in a very public sense. But yeah, this is how the sausage and the laws get made, and it's not pretty. And people hedge their bets, and they do so in ways that would seem to be sort of contradictory.
Right. Well, it's pretty for Billy Tauzin at any rate.